Let me tell you a story. I'm going to read a piece of it to you. As it grew dark, Vic stood on his balcony and he stared at the fireflies in the bushes. Very smart people are a bit like fireflies, he thought to himself. They are different from others and seem to glow with the light of their own intelligence. Others might find them scary because they are clearly so unlike everybody else. People may also envy them because they shine so bright without seeming to work hard for it. Teachers may think they are showing off, but they really can't help being different from others. Also, if you can do things faster and more easily than others, your brain can get bored. And then you might feel tempted to do things that you really shouldn't, just to stay busy and entertained. Vic's mother came out onto the balcony. "What's up?" she said, and she asked Vic with a smile as she settled into her favorite armchair. "Fireflies die early," Vic told her seriously. "So we must let them glow while they can." His mother looked interested, but she didn't say anything. Vic decided to explain things to her because she usually understood. Some people become super smart because they have a genius brain. Others become slow thinkers. There's no need to envy the fast thinkers or pity the slow thinkers. They are what they are. His mother nodded thoughtfully and pulled him closer. They sat snuggled up in the cool night air, watching the stars and the fireflies. But how can we decide whether the brain creates good thoughts or bad thoughts? Vic asked. His mother thought for a long time while he waited impatiently for an answer. "This is a good question, Vic," she said. "I think it depends on who you decide you want to be. Someone who others will think about with gratitude, or someone who wins the race each time?" Vic nodded seriously. His mother always said such interesting things and made them sound so simple. He decided to make a pretty drawing of fireflies and glowworms in a dark forest, lighting up the way for other animals. As you must have figured out by now, I write stories. Not long, complicated novels or mysteries or biographies, just simple 900-word stories for little folk. I've learned over the years that it takes a lot of hard work to work with little ones. So you will wonder, what about these stories made me turn towards them? As a psychologist, I have worked with children, with adults, with adolescents, with the elderly. But the one thing that adds a spark to my life is telling stories to children. I love the way their eyes light up with interest, how their minds create spice and zing with their own imagination for even a mundane narrative that I may have told them. They are so creative, they are so imaginative, they are very blunt, outspoken, candid, honest, no filters. I love that about them as well. There is a lovely line by the poet Wordsworth. He said, "Children come trailing clouds of glory." I think that's true. Speaking about this young under 10 generation, Generation Alpha, we call them. Speaking about this Generation Alpha, I'm going to tell you a fun anecdote that I remember from my initial days of story writing. But before that, you'll wonder, what is a grandmother like me, silver-haired granny, doing, creating stories for these little children? These are the reasons which I just narrated to you, that I find it far more fascinating to make stories and write stories for this little generation. Let me tell you that anecdote. This is about a little girl under 5. Her older brother was my pilot reader. When I started writing the stories, I would run them by young children. She had listened very carefully when her brother read this story about preventing addiction, preventing tobacco addiction, preventing cigarette smoking. She remembered everything. Then she went next door. She saw her neighbor lighting up a cigarette. She walked right up to him, bluntly told him the ill effects of smoking. Your oximeter will read really, really low, uncle, she said. I'm telling you, these children are like sponges. They pick up everything they read, hear, listen to, watch, all around them. I think adults are impacted with this honesty. I have a feeling that neighbor uncle will think twice before he picks up a cigarette another time. If you think back to that little piece I read from the first story, I had called it Brains That Glow. Very intelligent people. You might think, yes, Vic met a friend who's very bright, a genius, very talented, intelligent. But how many people do we know who are like that, who've got extraordinary intelligence? Very few. What about the rest? Should they be left behind? Should they be excluded? Let's flip to another story. This one was called Different Minds. Vic watched the little girl in the first row who was staring at the teacher and smiling sweetly. She looked like a little doll with her narrow eyes and her round face. She was a nice, friendly person and Vic liked her. Teacher had once told him that she was a special child. And sometimes the teacher even allowed her mother or a shadow teacher to sit with her in class. She didn't have to complete class tests along with the rest of the class. Teachers gave her a separate test afterwards when the class was done. Then there was the boy in the second row who found numbers difficult. Vic was also not that fond of numbers, but he did manage to get most of his sums right. This little boy would cry because he just could not understand when to add, when to multiply, when to divide, and which number to put above which number when you have to subtract. Vic always told him not to cry. Think how beautifully you sing, Vic said. Since the boy had an amazingly sweet voice and always sang the school prayer. Vic knew that everybody's brain is a little different. Some brains were good at numbers, others are good with shapes, colors, words, and some could process things very fast, while others took a lot of time. The little girl in his class, who was a special child, did not really understand a lot of what was being taught in class, but it was good for her to be there, because then they could all be friends, share lunch, laugh, talk together. His mother said studying was like sharpening your brain, like you sharpen your pencils before an exam. Left to itself, the brain would just grow blunt. So then Vic started imagining how a blunt brain would look. Well, what would you say Vic learned listening to both these stories, the one about very bright children and children who have special needs? Not only Vic, even other little children who read these stories, even the parents, the teachers who read them these stories. I think the idea of an inclusive world will start growing in all these minds. A world where there are no barriers, no differences, caste, creed, race, religion, language, socioeconomic status, disability, none of this will matter. A world where everybody is respected. A world where everybody has equal opportunity, who are treated with dignity. We see children all around the world who are kept out of school, who are kept out of peer groups for all these reasons and many more. This will be a world where we will celebrate differences, where inclusion is the rule of the day, where there are no barriers and no differences. I think it's essential that children learn about inclusiveness from when they are very young. Remember, they are going to build our society in the future. So we need to plant these ideas, these values, these beliefs in their mind very, very early. Storytelling is an immensely powerful way to do this. Thousands of years of experience with it has told us this. It is very impactful. It's very memorable. A story is never forgotten. We can use this to communicate these ideas to little children, build these healthy beliefs and attitudes. And remember, as I told you earlier, children are very imaginative. So they start working on these ideas in their own brain and they develop a positive attitude towards all children, whether they are disabled, whether they are like them, whether they are unlike them. They start respecting them. So stories create empathy. Stories are very impactful, they evoke emotions, they entertain, they educate, they engage. So they are extremely powerful as a tool for building inclusion. The first step to create or choose stories for children which will build this kind of inclusive thinking is to find stories, select and collect stories which are simple, age appropriate, or you might want to try writing them. Believe me, it's great fun. Try it. I'll give you some tips. First of all, write less. Believe me, years of reading postdoctoral and doctoral dissertations and theses have taught me this. It's much easier to write more. Very difficult to write less. You know, the first children's story which I attempted, to my absolute horror, was 1400 words. My pilot readers told me in no uncertain terms, this is too long. As I told you, they are blunt, they are candid. The second important thing is write simple. Again, who better than a university professor to tell you this? It's very easy to write jargon. It's very difficult to write in simple, easy to understand language. Most importantly, trust your pilot readers. Trust these under 10s. They are very intelligent, very sharp, much smarter than us. It's simple evolution. Every next generation becomes smarter. So they will tell you exactly which bits are not clear, which bits are the sentences which are difficult to understand, and so on. I see young people as instruments of social change. I think this honesty with which they speak to adults, this clarity of thinking, all of this makes them very powerful agents of change. And we have to train them, inculcate these values before societal biases creep in. Because once they grow up like you and me, they're going to have all those biases in their mind. Hence, my effort to write stories not for children, not by children, but through the lens of the child, through the eyes of the child, because I think they have an amazing perspective, which we have a lot to learn from. So my last question is, what did Vic teach us? Because when we write the story, we think, what did Vic learn from this story? But what did Vic teach us? Let me read you a little small excerpt from one last story. It was called Under the Blue Sky. And here you see children playing with nature and getting, you see today there is so much of involvement with screens, not required. So here in this story, you will see how I learnt from a child's perspective, how a child has a sense of agency, how they have clarity of thinking in terms of what they like and don't like. So let me read the last excerpt. Vic liked people who let him choose. He did not like people who told him what to do all the time. It made him feel responsible and good when he could make his own timetables and plan his own day. Why did adults feel that children were free all the time? Come, let's do this now. An adult will walk into the room and say to a child, but what if the child had other plans? So Vic liked it when people asked him about his own plans. He was a kind little boy. He didn't mind parking his own schedule if someone really needed him, but they really should ask first. You see how clearly children know what it is that they want from us. All we have to do is listen. I think I've had an amazing journey.